They made my mother cry in front of 30 people. They laughed at my father like he was nothing, like he was a joke they'd been waiting all night to tell. And I stood there, completely still, with a smile on my face. Because in that moment, something cold and sharp clicked into place inside me, and I made a decision. They would regret that day for the rest of their lives. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how I turned the worst night of my family's life into the beginning of everything good that came after. My parents are not flashy people, never have been. My dad, Gary, spent 30 years working at a lumber yard. He came home every single evening smelling like sawdust and sweat, ate whatever my mom put on the table, and never once complained. Not once. He coached my Little League team even though I was terrible. He drove me to every school play, every science fair, every early morning swim practice, without ever making me feel like it was an inconvenience. My mom, Linda, worked part-time as a school secretary for most of my childhood. She made Halloween costumes by hand. She knew the name of every one of my friends and asked about them by name every single time. She's the kind of woman who brings a casserole to a neighbor she barely knows just because she heard they were going through something hard. These are my people. Simple, good, honest people. Now, let me tell you about the Hargroves. Jake and I had been married for 3 years when all of this happened. Jake comes from money, not old money, but the kind of new money that acts like it's been there forever. His parents, Douglas and Pamela Hargrove, own a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. They live in a house with a fountain in the driveway. Pamela gets her hair done twice a week. Douglas has never, not once in the time I've known him, asked another person a genuine question about their life. From the very beginning, they were polite to my parents the way you're polite to someone you're waiting to stop talking. They smiled, they nodded, they changed the subject. They never asked my dad about his work. They never complimented my mom's cooking, even when she brought her famous lemon cake to every gathering. They treated my parents like background furniture, present but not important. I noticed. Jake noticed too, though he mostly made excuses for them. That's just how they are, Rachel. They don't mean anything by it. I let it go. For 3 years, I let it go. Then came Thanksgiving. It was at the Hargrove house, that massive place with the cathedral ceilings and the catered food and the bartender they actually hired for a family dinner. My parents drove 2 hours to be there. My mom wore her nicest blouse. My dad put on the sport coat he only wears for weddings and funerals. They brought 2 bottles of wine and a pecan pie from the bakery my mom loves. There were about 30 people there. Jake's aunts and uncles, cousins, family friends, neighbors. A full house, loud and warm the way holiday gatherings are supposed to be. For the first hour, everything was fine. My parents sat together on the love seat near the fireplace. A little quiet, a little out of place, but fine. My mom was talking to Jake's Aunt Carol. My dad had found a cousin of Jake's named Brett who liked fishing, and they were deep in conversation. Then dinner. We all sat down at these long tables Douglas had rented, formal place settings, cloth napkins, more forks than any normal person needs. Douglas stood up to give a toast. That's normal. He does it every year. But this year he decided to make a joke. He raised his glass and said with this big grin on his face that he was grateful for everyone at the table, family, friends, and, he said, even the new additions, no matter where they come from. People laughed, a polite, confused kind of laugh. Then he looked directly at my father and said, "Gary, I have to ask, do they even have Thanksgiving up in Millbrook, or is that more of a beans and cornbread situation?" The table went quiet for half a second. Then a few people laughed. Not everyone, but enough. My dad smiled, that horrible, tight smile people do when they've just been hit and they're trying to pretend they haven't. He said something like, "Ha, yeah, we keep it pretty simple." And Douglas nodded, satisfied, and moved on with his toast like nothing had happened. But Pamela was the one who finished it. She leaned over to the woman sitting next to her, loud enough to hear, quiet enough to pretend it was private, and said, "Bless their hearts, they tried so hard tonight." She was looking at the pecan pie my mother had brought, sitting at the end of the dessert table next to the catered cheesecakes and the fancy tarts from the bakery Pamela orders from in the city. My mother heard her. I know she heard her because I watched her face. I watched something go out in her eyes. She picked up her cloth napkin, pressed it to the corner of her mouth, and looked down at her plate, and her shoulders dropped, just a little, in a way I had never seen before. My mother has never been ashamed of anything she's made with her own hands, not once, in my entire life, until that moment. I looked at my dad. He was staring at the centerpiece, jaw tight, hands flat on the table. I looked at Jake. He was looking at his plate. I didn't say a word. I sat there, and I finished dinner, and I helped clear the table, and I hugged Pamela goodbye, and I told Douglas it was a lovely evening. And then I sat in the passenger seat while Jake drove home, and I stared out the window the whole 2 hours, and I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I was completely still, because I was thinking. That week, I called my mom twice. Both times she said she was fine. Both times she changed the subject to ask about my garden or Jake's new car or whether I'd seen some show she was watching. My mom is not a woman who complains. She is not a woman who asks for help. She absorbs things quietly and keeps moving. And I think that made it worse for me. Not better, worse. Because it meant this wasn't the first time. It meant she had learned, somewhere along the way, to swallow things like that and keep walking. And the thought of how many times she had done that, not just with the Hargroves, but in her life, that thought sat in my chest like something heavy. I called my dad. He picked up on the first ring, which he always does. I asked him if he was okay. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Rachel, I've been called worse by better people. Don't worry about your old man." And he laughed, that easy laugh of his that he uses when he wants you to think something didn't get to him. It got to him. I knew it got to him. Because 2 days later, my mom called me and said, quietly, almost casually, that Dad had taken the sport coat to the dry cleaner. "He never does that," she said. "He must have really wanted to look nice." That was all she said, but I understood exactly what she meant. He had dressed up, he had tried, and he had been laughed at for it. I sat in my kitchen after I hung up that phone call, and I was quiet for a long time. And then I thought very clearly, I am not going to let this be the story. Not the story of my family, not the story of who we are. I was not going to sit across from Douglas and Pamela Hargrove for the next 30 years of holidays and watch my parents shrink themselves to fit into a room where they were never made to feel welcome. I wasn't angry in the way that makes you do stupid things. I was angry in a quieter, colder way, the kind of angry that makes you patient. I started making a plan. Now, I want to be clear about something. I wasn't plotting anything cruel. I wasn't looking to embarrass anyone or blow up my marriage or cause a scene. That's not who I am. What I decided was this. I was going to build something. I was going to become someone that even Douglas and Pamela Hargrove could not dismiss. And I was going to do it so completely, so undeniably, that the day would come when my parents walked into a room and held their heads high, not because anyone gave them permission to, but because the room belonged to us just as much as anyone else. At the time, I was working in marketing at a mid-sized company. I was good at my job, but I had been comfortable, coasting a little, if I'm honest. I had ideas I hadn't acted on. There was a small consulting business I'd been thinking about starting for 2 years, just thinking, never doing. I stopped just thinking. I worked on it every night after dinner, weekends, early mornings before Jake woke up. I built a website. I reached out to my network. I took on my first 2 clients for almost nothing just to build the portfolio. Jake thought it was a phase. He was supportive in the way someone is supportive when they don't really believe it's going to amount to anything. It wasn't a phase. Within 8 months, I had 6 clients. Within a year, I had 14. I had to quit my full-time job to keep up with the work, which was the scariest thing I had ever done. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot of my old office after I handed in my notice, shaking, thinking, "What are you doing, Rachel? What are you doing?" But I kept going. There were hard months where I questioned everything, where a client dropped off and the bank account got thin, and I had to have a difficult conversation with Jake about money and risk. Months where I worked so hard I forgot to eat and cried in the bathroom at 10 o'clock at night because I was tired down to my bones. But here is what got me through every single one of those nights. I thought about my dad in that sport coat. I thought about my mom's shoulders dropping over a pecan pie. And I got back up. 2 years after that Thanksgiving, something shifted. My business was doing well. Really well. I had a small team. I had clients who referred other clients. I had been featured in a regional business magazine. Just a small feature, nothing huge, but my mom had printed it out and put it on the refrigerator. And the Hargroves had started to notice. Not in a big, dramatic way, it was subtle at first. Pamela asked me at Christmas how the little business was going. I told her clearly and without bragging exactly how it was going. She nodded with this expression I'd never seen on her face before, something close to recalculation. Douglas asked Jake about it at a golf outing. Jake told me later that Douglas had said, "Your wife might actually be onto something." Like I needed his validation. I didn't, but I noted it. Then came the moment I had not planned for, but would not have traded for anything. Douglas called me directly. Not Jake, me. He was trying to launch a marketing campaign for a new dealership location, and the agency he was using was under-delivering. Someone had recommended me. He didn't know it was going to be me until I picked up the phone. The silence when he realized who he'd called was one of the more satisfying moments of my adult life. He asked if I did that kind of work. I told him I did. He asked if I was expensive. I told him my rates were competitive for the results I deliver. And I let that sentence sit there without explaining myself further. We met the following week. I came prepared. I came professional. I came as someone who did not need this contract to survive. He hired me. And here is the thing about that. I did excellent work for him. I didn't phone it in. I didn't quietly sabotage anything. I'm not built that way, and honestly, that was never the point. The point was simply this. He needed me. He called me. He sat across a conference table from me and took notes when I talked. Douglas Hargrove took notes when I talked. The following Thanksgiving was at their house again. My parents came. Same 2-hour drive. My mom brought her pecan pie, same as always, because that is who she is, and she does not change who she is for anyone. When we arrived, Pamela greeted my mother warmly, genuinely, I think, or at least as genuine as Pamela gets. She saw the pie and said, "Oh, Linda, you brought your pie. Douglas was actually asking about it last week." My mom looked at her for a second. Then she smiled. A real smile. My dad got pulled into a conversation with Douglas and 2 of his business associates. I watched from across the room. I watched Douglas introduce my father, introduce him to the other men with a little nod in my direction, like my dad was worth knowing because of who his daughter was. Now, my dad does not need anyone's approval. I want to make that clear. Gary Mitchell has never needed anyone's approval in his life. But I watched him stand a little taller in that moment. I watched him shake those men's hands and settle into the conversation with ease. And when I caught his eye from across the room, he gave me this small nod. Just a small one. I had to look away because I wasn't going to cry at the Hargroves' house. I refused. Later that night, when Jake and I were driving home, he reached over and held my hand. He said, "You know my parents really respect you." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry it took them so long." And that was enough. That was actually enough. I've thought a lot about that Thanksgiving night. The first one, the one with the toast and the quiet comment in my mother's face. And here's what I know now. What Douglas and Pamela did was small and thoughtless and mean. People like that don't even always know they're doing it. They just look at someone and calculate their worth in about 3 seconds, based on their clothes and their zip code and the car they drove up in. And my parents didn't score high on any of those things. But here's what my parents had that no car dealership or catered dinner or fountain in the driveway can buy. They raised a woman who loves them enough to go to war quietly on their behalf. They raised someone who learned from watching them that dignity isn't something other people give you. You build it, you carry it, you show up with it even when the room doesn't recognize it yet. My mom's pecan pie was the best thing on that dessert table the first year, and it was the best thing on that table the second year. The only difference was that the second year, people knew enough to say so. That's not about the pie. That's never been about the pie. If you are watching this and you have been in a room where someone made you feel like you didn't belong, or where someone looked at the people you love and found them lacking, I want you to hear me when I say this. Don't waste your pain. Don't waste a single drop of it. Use it like fuel. Go quiet, go deep, and go to work. Not to hurt anyone, not to destroy anything, just to build yourself into someone so solid, so capable, so genuinely good at what you do, that the opinion of small people becomes background noise. The best revenge isn't making someone suffer, it's making them irrelevant. And it's standing next to your parents someday in a room that used to make them small and watching them hold their heads up. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's everything.